So anyway, thank you. I'm always inspired and in awe, seeing what's being accomplished here. And so thank you for letting me just drop in and participate willy nilly. It's amazing. So what I'd like to talk about is, well, I really just wanted to share the thesis of my new book, whose cover you can see here, Brighter. And my hope is that the book and its message can help catalyze a new and more optimistic vision and conversations about the future of the environment and why, as the title of the book suggests, it is, in my view, so much brighter than so many of us realize. And so I thought what I would do today is start by explaining why I think pessimism is so prevalent. And then I'll talk about why today the data, together with an understanding of disruption, which is what my research has worked on, tells us a different story and a far more optimistic story. Then I'll just talk briefly and touch on some high-level implications of this shift in perspective from pessimism to optimism. And then I thought I would end by suggesting some ways that we can start to think a little bit differently about the future, about the natural world and our relationship with it, and open that to a general sort of free-form conversation, if that sounds like a reasonable plan. So, all right, well, let's start with that first part. Environmentalism today, it seems to me, certainly to my eye, to be characterized overwhelmingly by pessimism. And so I think it's reasonable to start by asking why. Why is that the case? And I think at its most fundamental level, pessimism is it's a consequence, it's a result of despair, of hopelessness in the face of obstacles, in the face of problems, in the face of challenges. It's a belief that the future cannot be as good as we wish it would be, as we imagine it might be, and we can't see how. It's because there appear to be problems that just don't have a viable solution. That's my overarching take on it. And so in a nutshell, modern environmentalism, I would propose, is pessimistic because up until now, most environmentalists just haven't been able to see exactly how we can tackle major environmental problems like climate change, or at least how we can solve them without also incurring huge and intolerable losses of other kinds, in particular losses of human prosperity and quality of life in the process. And so modern environmentalism has therefore, become mostly a fairly dismal exercise in, how do you muster the will to make these dreadful sacrifices that are necessary to achieve sustainability? How do we find a way as individuals or collectively to give up prosperity, to forego quality of life and collective prosperity in the name of sustainability? And the way the thinking goes, obviously, is that if we don't make those sacrifices, if we don't downgrade, if we don't do this now, well, then the whole system will collapse, and not too terribly long from now, and that will torpedo all of our prosperity anyway. And so that's obviously what it means to be unsustainable. But there's embedded in that logic, there's a clear assumption, there's a contingency, right? That logic it rests on the assumption that sacrifice, that downgrade, that pivoting from prosperity or the pursuit of prosperity into austerity is the only way to achieve sustainability. It's the only way to have even a chance of solving these formidable problems we face. And so, in other words, the modern environmental movement, most environmentalists across the planet, are pessimistic because we just have a baseline assumption that we can't have human prosperity without also taking an unsustainable toll on the rest of the biosphere. And so that means that we have this a priori assumption that we can't solve environmental problems with innovation, with new knowledge and ideas, with science and technology. Right? That's my framing of the baseline thinking here. And I want to stress here at the start that not only do I think that is a false assumption, and I hope to show and argue why this is not true, but I also want to go a step further and suggest that it's actually this is a very dangerous idea. This is a very dangerous and potentially harmful assumption. And the reason why is that, and let me take you through the reasoning. The reason why I think it has the potential to be very dangerous is that if we recognize climate change and other environmental problems as these catastrophic, potentially existential risks to humanity, and then we also believe that they can't be solved with progress and prosperity, right? If we put those two ideas side by side together, then the logical conclusion that follows is that all human progress up until now has been for nothing, right? That's what follows logically. It's all just been a Faustian bargain. So what the hell was the point of it anyway? I think that catastrophic sort of pessimism, that catastrophism, directly undermines confidence in the idea of progress itself. And that is dangerous. I think that's what we're seeing. I think we're seeing a strong element, a strong thread of that now in the narrative surrounding all of these environmental issues. There's a bitter, defeatist disillusionment, right? There's this shadow that's cast over the whole business. And what that does, I'm concerned, is that it opens the door to very destructive forms of populism and other reactions to the institutions and social structures and so on that we have in place, imperfect as they are. Because, why not smash the system if the future is unavoidably bleak anyway, right? Why not? I think history shows us quite clearly that, a pessimistic, defeatist, what have we got to lose kind of mindset has the potential to be extremely dangerous. And of course, it would be an incredibly tragic irony if any of those ideas got put into practice, if any of that danger were realized on the cusp of, on the eve of making real breakthroughs into a much brighter future. There would sort of be a terrible tragedy twisted on top of that too, if any of this hazard were to be realized or actualized. So I want to suggest that there's more at stake here than just a simple debate about oil. Should you see the glass as half full or half empty based on the evidence that we perceive? I think there's more at stake here than that. Fundamentally, much more at stake. Okay, so in my view, what's been desperately needed and missing up until now is the evidence, the understanding of exactly how new ideas out of science and technology and new tools and so forth can solve specific environmental problems, and especially climate change. That's the elephant in the room, of course, because it's not enough to have just blind faith in the power of innovation, right? Given the ecological damage humanity has caused so far, I mean, the environmental movement has every reason to be skeptical of any dogmatic claim, right? About, okay, well, just relax. Market forces will automatically incentivize the creation of solutions that, at the 11th hour and in time to prevent catastrophe. Just relax. No, that would be a pretty blind dogma, and quite rightly open to criticism. But I don't think that's our situation. And so then reasonable to ask what's changed. Why not? What's different about my view? And this is where our work at my organization at Rethink X, along with a growing body of other researchers around the world, have started to provide some of the missing pieces of the puzzle here. And so that's what I wanted to show primarily in these slides, is that evidence for how progress, how innovation, how science and technology really do offer us an amazing path forward. Okay, so that's what I want to take us through pretty quickly here. It's a fairly standard story that Rethink X has been telling for a number of years now, and I'll try to go through it fairly quickly. But the gist of it is that we are presently on the cusp of 3 major technology disruptions that are all going to unfold simultaneously over the next 2 decades, and that these disruptions will completely transform fundamental sectors, pillars of the global economy and of civilization itself. And the 3 that I'm talking about are energy, transportation, and food. Now, just recall it's worth keeping in mind that we've just lived through the disruption of a fundamental sector, a pillar of the economy and civilization. We've just lived through the disruption of information and communications by the internet and digital and related digital technologies. Right? So 30 years ago, 1992, for all practical purposes, outside a handful of government and academic networks and labs, there was no internet. There was no digital media, no websites, no email, no digital cameras, no digital music, no digital video, nothing. Ordinary people had never seen it, never experienced it, had no engagement or interaction with those technologies whatsoever. They just didn't exist for almost everybody in 1992. And yet 15 years later, we had the first iPhone, right? So it did not take very long for that disruption to change the world, very literally change the world. And it shocked most observers how quickly it did so. And it affected virtually every industry across the planet. It transformed the global economy. It created millions of new businesses across hundreds of industries and trillions of dollars of new economic value. And of course, along the way, it created problems. We're seeing those now and have along the way. Some of those problems were very difficult to anticipate ahead of time, right? Like the downsides of social media, for example. But there's no question that the disruption happened swiftly and had a profound impact on human civilization. So what my research points to, and what I will argue, is that the disruption of energy and the disruption of transportation and the disruption of food each will be comparable in scale and impact to what we've just seen happen to information and communications. And so each one of those on its own would be world changing. But all three at the same time, coming on the heels of another one, is to my knowledge, it's unprecedented in human history. Okay, so this is all to emphasize the point that we're at an extraordinary turning point. We're at an extraordinary moment historically. So very quickly, what are disruptions? Well, that's this first slide here, and it's a disruption occurs when one or more new technologies emerge that offer far more value than older technologies do. So they're either much cheaper at the same level of quality, or they're much higher quality at the same price, or some combination. And not just a little bit better, not just a marginal improvement, but a very substantial step change improvement. 3, 5, 10, 20, 100 times better value for money, or value in some way. And the result is that these new technologies are overwhelmingly competitive. And then the raw economic incentive leads to them being very, very rapidly adopted. So the new technologies grow explosively at first, and so the beginning of their trajectory looks exponential. And at the same time that happens, the old technologies are being outcompeted and wiped out, and they collapse, and the industries around them collapse. Now, eventually, adoption of the new technology slows down as it approaches saturation, and it then becomes the new normal and waits for itself to be disrupted at some point in the future. So in the process, the market or segment or industry or the sector, disruptions can happen at different scales. Whatever scale it happens, the system that's involved, whether it's this individual market or an industry or the entire sector, it tends to expand, it tends to grow as a result of disruption. And that's probably because, if technology offers more affordable and more capable, more affordability and more capability, then it stands to reason there will be new applications that emerge, new use cases, new business models that are supported, and so on. So the idea that disruptions also expand and grow the opportunity space around technology, that seems to make some sense. And we see that again and again. Now, the next slide over, it just shows examples. And these, you can go up and have a close look, but the point here is not the data that's on those slides or even the specific industries. The point here is just to show that the same fundamental pattern of a new technology growing, tracing an S-shaped curve, accelerating at first and then decelerating, overlapped with the old technology collapsing as a mirror, sort of a reflection, that this is a pattern that we see again and again throughout history, across industries of all kinds, for technologies of all different kinds. So from carpenter's nails to car tires to digital cameras, it's the same pattern again and again and again, and the same time scale. These things don't happen slowly over 50 or 100 years and take generations. They the examples, whether it's a new breed of corn or a new kind of brake on a car, like car brakes, drum brakes versus other kinds of brakes, or whether it's digital technology or whether it's pharmaceuticals, we see the same thing again and again and again. The pattern unfolds typically over just 10 to 20 years, almost never more than 20 years, rarely less than 10 years. And so today we have every reason to expect that energy, transportation, and food will become textbook cases of disruption. And so that's what the series of the next slides shows. It shows how in energy we have three technologies. We have solar and wind and batteries. And in each of those cases, the costs of the technology are declining consistently and predictably over time. The y-axis happens to be log axis. It's a log scale, so it's a consistent trend that you can visualize as a straight line if you're plotting the data on a log scale. But nevertheless, the consistency is there, and it's startling how consistent it is. Probably the consistency is mostly to do with scaling. So as these industries scale up and deploy, the technology and the manufacturing methods are refined and the supply chains are economized and so forth, you get economies of scale and other learnings, which together amount to an experience curve. And so what we're seeing here are consistent trends on an experience curve for these technologies. And then accompanying or alongside, this very predictable cost trajectory are an exponential adoption trajectory. Is that on the opposite me? Let's see here. That's wind and batteries. Is it down here? Probably down here somewhere. Anyway, the slides, basically all the slides show on these charts is the same pattern again and again and again. That for each of the technologies involved, the costs are falling consistently and the adoption is growing, for now, exponentially, because we are in the first portion of the S-shaped trajectory of the disruption. In energy, it's solar, wind, and batteries. In transportation, it's electric vehicles and batteries, the same batteries, by the way, so there's a synergy there. In transportation, we're not quite there yet, but we'll probably see some explosive growth in autonomous driving technology over the course of this decade, over the 2020s, and that will turbocharge the adoption of electric vehicles. Because self-driving vehicles that are electric make much more sense than ones that are combustion engine based. And in food, it's the same story again. Roblox didn't like my slides with the food data because there were pictures of pharmaceutical vials on them. It was just pictures of insulin, but apparently that looks too much like drugs, and so it didn't make it past the filter into Roblox. So those slides aren't here, but it's the same pattern, right? Price falling consistently over time. As the technology become cheaper and cheaper, they can become deployable into more and more markets. So at first, the two technologies, precision fermentation and cellular agriculture, could only support pharmaceuticals, where it was okay for something to cost $1 million a kilogram because you only needed very, very small quantities of it. But that won't do for food. The technology has to become many, many, many orders of magnitude cheaper before food markets open up. But now we're finally there. So with precision fermentation, that makes fats and proteins and other molecules from microbes, and cellular agriculture makes animal products from animal cells without growing the entire animal, the lab-grown meat and leather and so forth. In both cases, those new technologies, they enjoy massively greater efficiencies than animal agriculture does. So, in terms of feedstock input and energy and water inputs and the land required, especially the land required. And so that puts the new food technologies onto a clear path, like the new energy technologies, like the new electric vehicles in transportation, to being much cheaper and therefore much, much more competitive and compelling as a value proposition than the old technologies are. In this case, livestock, traditional livestock and seafood. If you can get an indistinguishable or better product for the same or a lower price, the transformation is all but inevitable. Okay, so in each of these three sectors, energy, transportation, and food, that my team has analyzed, we see this pattern. Better quality at a fraction of the cost, and it looks like disruption is inevitable. And the trends and trajectories are all there. They're all aligned. So we can see this coming. We know that they've begun. And following those curves out to their conclusions, it looks like the disruptions will be complete by the mid to late 2030s in all three of those sectors. We have every reason to believe that they will adhere to the historical pattern rather than deviate from the historical pattern. Despite all of the naysaying, right? I mean, in the early 1990s, it was all the same stuff, all the same objections. Oh, this new technology, this newfangled internet stuff is great, but how will we ever build enough infrastructure? How are we ever going to lay enough cable or even manufacture enough cable? How is everybody going to have a computer? It's just the scaling that's required, the investment that's required. It's way too much. It's going to take 100 years. And this is linear thinking, and the processes are not linear. Okay, so that is the data and the historical basis for.
Just a comment, Adam, that the graphs for wind, battery, and solar are sort of behind you on the other side of this.
Oh, they're behind me. I see. That's where.
Yeah, okay. It's not very obvious, I'm afraid. Yeah, but they are.
That's okay. And they can be perused later. We don't need to dwell on the specifics of the data. It's enough to simply recognize that the data provide evidence that supports the case. Very, very compelling in my mind. Evidence that supports the case, supports the argument that the disruption of energy, transportation, and food are imminent, and they are likely to unfold just as we've seen so many others unfold in the past over the next 15 to 20 years. And that they, in this case, they will be extraordinary in their environmental implications. So let me talk about those. First, energy, transportation, and food together account for 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 90%. So disrupting those industries with clean technology that's cheaper than fossil fuels and animal agriculture will directly eliminate most of those emissions. Right? So if we stop burning fossil fuels for electricity, heating, and if we stop burning them in road vehicles, that's 75% of emissions worldwide gone right there. If we stop eating animals, or rather, if we stop eating animal products from animals, then that's the other 15%. Okay, well, that's the first pretty big implication, right? Second, and really very exciting and not intuitive at all, not obvious at all, is that the food disruption in particular will free up an absolutely enormous area of land worldwide. So when we run the numbers, it's 2.5 billion hectares of land freed up from animal agriculture. So that is an area, and there's a graph there, one of the slides down on the far end shows it. That's an area the size of the United States and China and Australia combined. Those three, essentially continental land masses.
Shall we?
It's very easy to forget.
Take a look at
that?
Yeah,
sure, we can go down and have a look. Yeah. I mean, it's really easy to forget. It's very easy to forget that agriculture as a whole represents more than 97% of all human land use. Right? Everything else together, all urban and suburban land, all roads and railways and airports and infrastructure, all mines, all parks and golf courses, all that other stuff, 3%. It's not quite a rounding error, but it's pretty close, right? So 97% is agriculture. And over half of that is for animals.
Are you talking about US or that's worldwide?
No, that's the world.
Yeah.
That's the world. So of the land that human beings use, and we don't use every scrap of land on the planet, deserts and beaches and so forth, or even certain forests and the ice caps and so forth, you can exclude the glaciers, you can exclude from these numbers. But of the land that we use, virtually all of it is for agriculture. And so when you look at this, it's crazy that the amount of land that the food disruption will free up from animal agriculture, and by animal agriculture I mean the pasture, the grazing land, and the crop land used to grow feed for animals. When you put all of that land together, well, today that's 30 times more land than all of the other built environment land use combined. It's totally mind-blowing, right? And we are probably going to get back about 80% of the land that's currently devoted to supporting animals. We're not going to get back all of it because, we will have to use some of that land to produce the inputs for the new technologies, but they are at least 80% more efficient. And so we're likely to get a very large chunk of that land back. So then it's amazing to start thinking about what an opportunity that presents for conservation, for preservation, for rewilding landscapes, for reforestation that will sequester carbon, right? I mean, just in the report that we wrote, we ran the numbers for just leaving the land fallow and doing nothing with it, not active reforestation or trying to, do the most carbon sequestration. Just what happens to land if you just stop farming it and let it alone? And it turns out that, the scale of the amount of landscape we're talking about is so large that just leaving the freed up land fallow and doing nothing with it would offset the remaining 10% carbon footprint and take us to net zero, more than that, actually. So, and we can, of course, accelerate carbon uptake if we chose to, with active reforestation and active ecological restoration on some of the land that's freed up from animal agriculture. So this is astonishing. This is absolutely astounding. And, I don't know, I'm sort of surprised it's not just the only thing that environmentalists talk about, but it seems to be, still quite an unspoken and undiscussed topic, which
Can I ask a question here?
I don't know what to read into that, but anyway, I'm discouraged that this isn't at the forefront of every environmentalist's thinking and attention. Yeah, go ahead and ask a question.
Well, maybe I'll put Matt's question ahead of mine. So he says, is there a security risk in concentrating food production into a much smaller landmass? Or is the 20% that will be used still large and distributed enough to be infeasible? I mean, it could easily concentrate precision fermentation could easily concentrate the production of food even more intensely than it already is, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very good question. It's a great observation. In some ways, it would concentrate production. It would concentrate it at the facility level of analysis, right? So a factory production facility would be smaller than a farm or a large grazing land or pasture. So in that sense, there would be greater concentration, and there could be security risks associated with that. On the other hand, at a larger geographic unit of analysis, precision fermentation can be done anywhere and is not as regionally constrained. And so you could produce food where it is consumed much more easily with precision fermentation, for example. Just having a stock of durable feedstock inputs, right? You just have you could have silos of sugar or whatever else are your inputs into your processes, and those could be located anywhere. And then you would not be dependent upon farming regions or other nations, for example, in the same way, and dependent upon their agriculture. And agriculture is a volatile, from year to year, volatile enterprise at the best of times. And so, if you are a nation that that does not grow its own food today, these new technologies are almost certainly going to alleviate rather than exacerbate security risks and level the playing field and be a force for decentralization and democratization and equity, as opposed to centralizing risk and vulnerability. But it's interesting, it's like anything, it's not purely black and white. There's sort of I think a mix of push and pull there. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so just quickly to wrap up on the land, that's really it's amazingly mind blowing. But don't forget about the oceans. right? We're clobbering them as well, and seafood is not going to escape disruption. So the potential benefits to the world's oceans when we stop strip mining them with millions of fishing vessels will be amazing as well. So that's potentially fantastic news for aquatic marine ecosystems. And that's the 3 disruptions that my team has looked at. And we have every reason, again, as I said, to expect them to unfold following the same pattern we've seen throughout history. So all this brings me to sort of the closing things I wanted to talk about, which were these very high-level implications that come out of this. On their own, each of these disruptions would clean up their sector and its footprint quite a bit. That's immensely exciting. But some real magic also happens when we put them together, right? So energy, transportation, and food are foundational. The impacts, changes in those sectors, they reverberate. They affect everything else across civilizations. Energy goes into everything, right? Energy is an input into almost every link of every supply chain. Same with transportation, to a less extent perhaps with food, although you do have to feed everyone who works in every industry because they all have to eat. So the upshot here, quite extraordinary, is that when energy gets cheaper, everything gets cheaper. And when energy gets cleaner, everything under this, everything in civilization gets cleaner. And by the same token, it's true for transportation, food too. Transportation gets cheaper, everything else does. Transportation gets cleaner, everything else does. And perhaps to a lesser degree, food as well. So that's pretty amazing. We're talking about 3 disruptions that have the potential to foster a level of material abundance at the same time as really cleaning up major portions of their dirty environmental footprint. Okay, so there are a few implications, or there are a few things that follow on from this. A few pieces of a few conclusions that we can draw. The first one is that the disruptions feed into each other. They amplify and accelerate one another, right? You need energy to grow food, and transportation utilizes energy and so forth. So because we've got 3 disruptions simultaneously, and because they are sort of catalyzing and accelerating one another, they are going to unfold even faster than they otherwise would, which is crazy to think about. And then they would if they were on their own. Second, it's very exciting to think that we can reduce our environmental impact while at the same time not just retaining but expanding human prosperity as everything gets cheaper and cleaner. That's really extraordinary. That's a fundamental paradigm shift. We've seen throughout history also that wherever energy and mobility and food are abundant, prosperity follows. So there's every reason to expect that these disruptions will create an explosion of global prosperity and do a great deal to break down barriers that currently exist for human development. Now, that's not to say that everything will proceed perfectly equally, that there will no longer be disparity or problems with equity and fairness and justice across the planet. Of course, we will still have massive challenges to deal with there. But these technologies clearly open the door to prosperity via abundance. And that is a very encouraging and exciting prospect, especially if that's all possible without taking a terrible toll on the environment. Okay, the third very high level and overarching implication that's exciting here is that all of the prosperity that's enabled by these disruptions, so all of the abundance and all of the prosperity that are facilitated by these new technologies, will allow us to do more than just stop harming the planet. Right? So far, that's where most environmentalists' thinking has been stuck, is we just need to stop hurting the planet. Yes, of course, that's true, but that's only the first step. We also need to heal the planet to repair the damage we've already done. And that is massively more feasible with prosperity than it is amidst privation and austerity. And so these disruptions, by making environmental restoration more affordable and more politically feasible amidst prosperity, that's super exciting, all right? I mean, after all, it's much easier to care about the environment when you're rich than when you're poor. Wealthy nations protect their environment in their own backyards because they can afford to. Well, the disruptions open the door to everybody, everywhere, almost everywhere, being able to afford to care and to act on environmental concerns. So that is extremely, extremely encouraging. The idea that, and combined with the opportunity, literally the land area opportunity afforded by the food disruption, it's pretty extraordinary. We would have both the means and the place to undertake massive ecological restoration if we chose to. And just the fact that this choice might emerge is beyond the wildest daring imagination of most environmental discourse that I've seen up until very, very recently. So the prospects ahead of us are much more encouraging and exciting than I think we've dared to hope in the past as environmentalists. So that's enormously encouraging. Okay, so to wrap up very quickly, the thesis of the book and of my work in general with Rethink X is that our best and really our only plausible way to solve these formidable environmental problems we face is with prosperity, is with progress and prosperity. And honestly, this shouldn't come as a surprise, right? I mean, it's how we have solved virtually all other problems, great and small, individual and collective, throughout human history, right? I mean, it's much easier to solve your own problems or society's problems amidst prosperity than, amidst privation and poverty and austerity. So I'm excited to be able to offer, through our research, a clear and a data-driven explanation for how we can achieve that prosperity. And of course, that's what's been missing for so long, is how on earth could we solve these problems with prosperity? Where's that prosperity going to come from? Well, now I think we can see it really could come from these disruptions. Okay, one very final twist to the story, that turbocharges the whole thing, of course, is that there's a fourth disruption coming. There's a fourth disruption. It's not just these three, there's a fourth. And the fourth is bigger than the other three combined. The fourth is the disruption of human labor by artificial intelligence and automation. And of course, it's going to happen simultaneously with the other three, right? So if you think cheap, clean energy, transportation, and food will lead to prosperity, or could lead to prosperity, or open the door and create the opportunity for prosperity, well, just imagine what a functionally unlimited supply of cheap machine labor powered by sunlight and wind will do for the prospects of prosperity. So to me, the disruption of labor by automation and AI, God, that seems like that could be what allows humanity to reach prosperity escape velocity, I think. Now, my team has not done research on the disruption of labor yet. That's not a disruption. We're still grappling with that. I hope we can do work on that going forward and publish some useful insights on that. There's enormous potential, of course. There's enormous risks and hazards as well, of all kinds, as I'm sure we can all imagine and might be fun to talk about, as well as the enormous potential benefits of automation and AI and disrupting human labor. But I will leave that to other speakers and to any further conversation we want to have. So thank you for taking the time to listen. And I do hope that this is encouraging and provides a rational basis for optimism, not just sort of a can-do attitude, but real reasons to be optimistic about the future of the environment. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam. Mash that thumbs up button, everybody.
I see those. That's cool.
Yeah, that's a new feature. Questions for
awesome.
Adam. We have plenty of time for questions, so don't be shy.
I have a question. Can I be heard clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Adam. About the final point about sort of the interaction between AI and these other disruptions, and I want to kind of quiz you on the first three disruptions. So with AI, I mean, my talk later is going to be a little bit about some of the risks that we foresee coming from that. My question is, I think I can foresee risks coming from AI. What are some risks that could come from the other three disruptions One risk that I think I see, to maybe start you off, I'll get your reaction to, is if these technologies did come about and if the sort of control over them was not distributed fairly, they could lead to sort of concentrations of power, namely economic power, in the hands of small groups, and that could be that could lead to risks for everyone who's not those small groups. So yeah, I wonder if you think of what you think of that risk from these technologies and other risks from these disruptions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's different. The sets of potential risks differ across the disruptions. So in the example of energy, we don't seem to have a major risk of consolidation of, for example, of intellectual property. I suppose it's possible with some of the battery research that's going on that a real, profound breakthrough. We don't model breakthroughs, but if one were to occur, I doubt that we would see that in wind technology or solar photovoltaic technology at this point. But if one were to occur in batteries, I could see an individual company or an individual economy, like an individual nation, controlling, wielding undue control over the global supply of that. And that could be problematic, certainly in the short term. But in general, in energy, it's really quite an encouraging picture. Solar and wind are amend themselves, and batteries, to democratization and decentralization, especially because they work at all scales. So solar and batteries, they're great. You can wear them on your wrist, or you can have gigawatt scale installations and anything in between. You can't have that with a coal power plant or a nuclear power plant. In general, I think the risks are lower in the energy space for the consolidation of power. The risks that do exist in energy, and they exist in any disruption of an entire sector, is that any jobs, any industries, any nations that are currently tethered to and dependent upon the energy status quo, which has persisted around fossil fuels for a century or more, they are threatened. And so that's millions of people and millions of jobs, tens of millions of people and tens of millions of jobs and entire nations that will be negatively impacted as the industries that they have depended upon for so long collapse. And we cannot be callous about that. We can't ignore it, and we can't get blindsided by it. Those individuals, the industries, we need to let those go. And we don't want to be bailing out executives or shareholders. We want to be protecting the people, the workers in those industries, and the publics in those nations that are affected. And we have to do that. Honestly, we have to do that as an entire civilization, because if we don't, then the damage, the backlash, the consequences that could ripple across the global economy could be very negative and affect all of us, right? What's going on in Russia, for example, is a very complicated situation, but it certainly doesn't help that Russia faces an extremely bleak future economically, because its funding, especially for its government, is so closely tied to fossil fuels. And if that were to evaporate or diminish substantially, even drop by half, let alone drop by 80 or 90%, this is catastrophic for Russia, and then thus for global stability. So we need to think very carefully about how we manage the transformation. And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. We're not going to stop these disruptions. We have to be prepared for them and manage them. So that's energy. In transportation, just very quickly, in transportation, millions of people drive for a living, so it's the same situation. Truck drivers are going to be out of work. Taxi drivers are going to be out of work. That's huge numbers of people, and we can't be callous, and we can't be blindsided by that situation. The people who manufacture those vehicles, the industries that manufacture them, and so on. In food, again, similar sort of situation. Consolidation of power is a risk, right? If the precision fermentation and cellular agriculture technologies become, if monopolies emerge around key pieces of intellectual property, for example, then one could imagine something like what we saw with the internet, where yes, enormous new services and goods are available, and yes, lots of new value is created, but control is concentrated in the hands of a few giant mega corporations, Amazon, Facebook, Google, etc. One could easily imagine a parallel trajectory for food technology 15 or 20 years from now, right? And ideally, we would not want that. Ideally, we would want a larger ecosystem of companies, less consolidated control and power, more open alternatives, and so forth. Now, if we don't plan and we get blindsided by all of this, and our policymakers are not informed ahead of time, and the public is not pushing its elected representatives to make good policy, then we will simply fall into that trap as we have in the past. But knowing ahead of time and being forewarned and forearmed with that knowledge, maybe we can take a different course. And I certainly argue that we ought to think ahead and do precisely that in the book. And then the last thing, another risk with food and agriculture in particular, is that it is not, in the case of food and agriculture, unlike energy jobs and transportation jobs, food and agriculture is not just a job. Yes, tens, perhaps hundreds of millions of people will be affected by the end of animal agriculture when selling animal products from animals can no longer compete with the new animal products from new technologies. But that's different, because being a farmer is not quite the same as just working a job at an automotive factory that you might lose, or on an oil rig that you might lose. Farms are tied to history. They're tied to culture. The ownership of land is directly connected to livelihood in a way that it isn't for other occupations. So there is more at stake, perhaps, than just the loss of jobs that could be compensated if new jobs were made available or other supports were made available. If your entire livelihood and cultural history and heritage is wiped out by a new technology, and you lose your land as a result of that, that is a different set of calamities and impacts than just not being able to drive a taxi for a living anymore and having to find another job. Those are not identical things. Those are quite different, I think. And so the stakes perhaps are somewhat higher in the food disruption. And we need to be mindful of that. And policymakers need to be prepared and not be, plugging their ears and sticking their heads in the sand, but saying, okay, this is coming. What are we going to do about it? And I hope part of the work that my organization will do over the next several years is try to find some better answers to those open questions. Right now, they're open questions for which we don't have great answers, but we need to be asking these questions and seeking answers and through experiment and piloting and so forth now, while we still have time. This is going to be a very difficult and painful thing to react to. We definitely want to be proactive about managing the various risks and pitfalls that are certainly present.
On that theme, do you think, by the way, I enjoyed Matt's question and your answer. I was going to ask a similar thing. I'm just kind of wondering whether you feel we can get there, or whether we need similar disruption in our kind of political and ethical knowledge.
Yeah, that is a great question. My colleagues, the two founders of Rethink X, of my organization, Tony Seba and James Arbib, their most recent book does tackle that question. It asks, given the transformation that these disruptions spell for humanity, what is the kind of social and institutional response we will need to have? And that is just facing energy, transportation, and food. Again, my organization, I haven't in my research, they haven't in their research. It brought the entire AI picture into the question, or a question into the picture, which just takes, dials everything up another order of magnitude beyond, right? In terms of, what are we going to do if substantial fraction of all human labor is replaced by capital in the form of narrowly intelligent machines? It is something we desperately need to prepare for and figure out. I've seen a lot of proposals. I don't have my cards on any particular on any particular plan or proposal yet. I would love to hear ideas for what others think our response ought to be or can be to these things that are coming. But certainly a renegotiation of the general social contract seems in order. The idea that if you don't work for a crust, you're just going to starve in the street. It seems like that cannot be the path forward. So maybe we're looking at something like a universal basic income, but it undoubtedly will have to be much more complex and nuanced than just that. I'm thinking that I'm skeptical that a simple sweeping solution will work everywhere. We haven't seen much success with that in the past. We need to. I think that my strongest advice is that we need to recognize that this is a reality that's coming and prepare for it. And the best preparation we can do is to start experimenting and learning. So the first step in solving any problem is admit there's a problem, try to define it, get your arms wrapped around it, and then start testing solutions. What else are you going to do, right? For any formidable problem, for any formidable challenge, especially one for which the solutions are not likely to be identical everywhere. So I know that's not very satisfying. I wish I had a better, more satisfying set of answers, but these are profoundly difficult questions and challenges that we face. So although the basis for optimism is there at a fundamental level, enormous material abundance and prosperity that's generated cleanly, that's incredible. But how do we avail ourselves of that? Well, that is an enormous challenge and an open question. What are your ideas? Please, tell me, you guys. I want to know.
Before somebody solves the world's problems, I'll just insert a small comment. So the next session is supposed to start now, but due to an emergency has been cancelled. So this discussion can continue as long as Adam is free to continue it. So no time pressure. I think there was... Liam, did you have a question from earlier before we source comments on...
Yes. Yeah. I can't quite solve the world's problems just yet, but I'll give it a few more minutes. But I did have a question for you, Adam, about how government intervention affects disruption. And I guess I'm kind of... when I think about disruption occurring, it seems that markets generally need to be pretty free in order to respond to various price signals that are occurring, right? And so I wonder if in your research you've seen a kind of universality of the disruption regardless of the amount of government intervention, or whether in the current day there's way more political lobbying that happens for things like coal and stuff that might affect the ability for the disruption to truly happen.
Yeah, that's a great and very important question. My general read on the history of disruptions is that the first thing to recognize is that they are not stoppable. They seem to be unstoppable. So in that respect, there is a way in which there's a way to look at it in which you could argue that, well, it doesn't really matter what any individual government does. You can't get the horse back in the barn. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, et cetera, et cetera. However, having said that, different disruptions have had their particulars, and we have seen disruptions accelerated or delayed, both globally, by the efforts of individual but large and powerful governments. So, examples of those we can find in computing during wartime efforts, and even in the case of energy, China over the past decade and a half or so has had a variety of different policies, and the U.S. also some much smaller but still perhaps meaningful policy that has incentivized and therefore accelerated investment in solar panels and deployment of solar panels, and that's probably brought the timeline forward a little bit from where it would have just been with market forces in the energy disruption, just as an example. But so you can kind of massage you can push the timeline around. You can kind of squish or elongate or compress the S curve of the disruption, its trajectory. You can change it a little bit, both globally and in a particular society. But there's no stopping it completely. That's my read on it. There's no way to stop it completely. And as powerful as the oil and gas industry and the fossil fuel industry is today, they are vulnerable. And coal was a very powerful industry, for example, massive, titanic industry. And in the United States, coal has collapsed to nothing over the last 10, 11, 12 years now, I guess, since it peaked in 2011. It's just once investors jump ship because the growth prospects evaporate, doesn't take very long for the industry to just enter a death spiral. Even a very, very large, hundreds of billions of dollars committed and potentially trillions of dollars of assets in the field, they can all get stranded. So my read of history is that there's no way to stem the tide, the technological tide. You can just kind of direct the flow a little bit, massage it a little bit here and there, whether in your favor as an industry or in the interest of your society with wise governance. But having said that, there are some risks that we should be mindful of, where I think government intervention early on especially is very important. It could lead to much better specific outcomes, especially much less pain over the transition period, much more equity in the final outcomes. If we have smart intellectual property law around new food technologies, for example, we could probably get much better outcomes than we would if it was just unbridled market forces with existing IP law globally. That's just one example, but I don't think there's any stopping these three: energy, transportation, and food. It's the fourth one, the disruption of labor by AI and automation. Man, that's breaking all of our models and rules about disruption. I don't want to make any claims about that. I mean, the potential risks are so large. Then we're properly in sort of nuclear weapons technology territory, right? I mean, it's so profound and so potentially impactful, both positively and negatively, that I think we could rationally justify an enormous amount of regulatory control if it could be coordinated globally. But of course, if that can't be if it can't be controlled, the development of it, then some sort of arms race dynamic, just like the with nuclear weapons in the Cold War, it's probably inevitable. And with all of the risk that goes along with that. So I can speak a little more confidently about the disruption of energy, transportation, and food based on history and what we've seen. I'm hesitant to say anything really one way or the other about what's going to happen with AI. Everybody all the other speakers talking today are probably better equipped to answer questions about that one.
Here's a question. It's the efficient market hypothesis question. Sorry, Liam, I'll just ask this quickly. So, okay, you say these disruptions are coming, and for example, land use will be disrupted. Your data is publicly available. You're not basing this off secret knowledge. Other market participants can see it. Where is the signal in prices that reflects this fact? And if there isn't such a signal, is everybody just stupid? Or I'm asking the question generally of these disruptions, if they're predictable and there's evidence for them. In the case of coal, we can see this fact represented in the markets, but in terms of land use or labor automation, maybe we don't quite see it. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are some things that we can see and some indicators, and then some things that are sort of puzzling. They sort of suggest a level of denialism. And then there are, I think there are, so that's two things I'll talk about. And then a third point that I'll talk about is, I think there are that the status quo is something of an attractor basin, right? So that even if the dynamics are shifting, there is, there's a tendency, I think, for example, prices in markets, your price of meat at the supermarket, for example, to roughly remain unchanged or be pulled towards the status quo and what's familiar, even if the sands are all shifting underneath the industry's feet, as it were. Okay, so let me talk about each of those. In the first case, one thing that we definitely see, a key leading indicator, is the amount of investment that's going on. So the amount of money that's pouring into clean energy technology, that's now approaching, that is going to pass the $1 trillion mark in the 2020s. And that's $1 trillion annually invested. It's a staggering amount of investment going into clean energy. These are projects that are, slated now. They're in the pipeline. Just, an ungodly amount of investment, and that's quite visible. It's not all completely transparent, but we can see a lot of that investment, and so a lot of it's from governments, right? Especially in the energy sector, a lot of that investment is being made, but with public dollars and public money, not just private investment. And alongside investment, we see huge numbers of startups. So in the food space, for example, in the food disruption, there are, I think the last count was 400 and something start companies around the world that are startups around precision fermentation and cellular agriculture. And I don't have the dollar number of investment off the top of my head, but it's in the tens of billions now. So that's an indicator that it's early days, and we aren't seeing the effects of products in market yet, but we can certainly see the indication of anticipation from investment, both public and private. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing, I won't go on it like about this, but the last thing that the last point that I mentioned, you can enter. So here's an example. I'll give you a specific example with coal, and we've seen it with other industries in the past. Once your growth prospects evaporate, right? So nobody's investing in coal based on any illusion that it's got a bright future of growth ahead of it. No investment is currently being made of that kind. However, that doesn't mean it's not possible to make a lot of money as an investor in coal. And that's because there are a variety of sort of, I would broadly speaking call them shenanigans, but you can enter different modes of operation in an industry, in particular modes that are unsustainable. And in my organization, we throw them into a big bucket that we call rundown mode. And so an industry that's facing disruption and collapse, its investors and its shareholders and so forth, and even governments, if they're involved, they will pivot into a rundown mode, which means no new investment in the growth or the future, minimal investment in upkeep of equipment, the maintenance of assets, divestment from holdings that are vulnerable, exposed, trying to pass off existing assets that are going to be stranded onto hapless or more hapless investors. For example, dumping subsidiaries, loading up subsidiaries with doomed assets, and then offloading, those subsidiaries onto unsuspecting pension holders, pension funds and stuff. This is a pattern that we've seen in the past. It's really shady. That's the kind of thing to expect. And unfortunately, people can make an absolute killing during that rundown phase. It's possible to make very, very large amounts of profit, even when the industry itself is in the throes of collapse and death. So that is something to expect. And in the process of doing that, there's a lot of incentive to maintain the illusion that everything's fine, right? Oh, well, we're still mining coal. We're still running the coal power plants. And we are likely to see that in other industries as well. We're likely to see that in animal farming. We're likely to see that in the conventional auto industry, the automotive sector. Well, we'll just, people are going to still want to buy combustion engine Toyota Corollas 15 years from now, why would we fully commit to investing in changing all of our manufacturing to electric vehicles? So I think we're likely to see a lot of that in the three disruptions: energy, transportation, and food. Some pull towards the status quo is a little bit of a sort of a homeostatic, a little bit of an attractor base and systemically. As for the fourth one, labor, AI, you guys tell me. I have no clue. I really don't. I'm really struggling to see how it, those same rules apply, right? I mean, well, how does, yeah, well, we're, certainly there's a huge amount of investment. We're seeing that. So that's a leading indicator, but, what would we expect to see in labor markets? Or even in like professional service industries, like the artists and so forth, who are now being threatened by these new generative AI tools. What would we expect to see as an indication? Would there be a desperate sort of denialism and some sort of quietly, collectively agreed upon charade that nothing, everything's fine here, guys? Fire, your house on fire and your hair on fire in the background, and no, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. I mean, maybe there's some of that, but yeah, I don't know. It's just different than the coal industry going out of business. When everybody's job is at risk of being automated, it breaks the rules, and I'm still struggling to get my head wrapped around how the fourth disruption is going to work. It's just too much that's different about it.
And just a quick comment on that, which is pretty much what I was going to respond to your earlier response with, Adam. I think implicit in the environmental disruptions you're talking about is a simultaneous political phase transition that happens as the collective consciousness becomes more aware of the damage CO2 does and how we need to protect the environment and all of these things. And I think where it's a deeply fascinating question for AI is whether that same kind of political phase transition can happen for something that seems to attack like our fundamental being in a much more significant way. So yeah, that's just a comment, but it's scary.
Yeah, I think that's really, really insightful, really interesting. I should have included in my slides a diagram. It's sort of a two flywheel diagram, and it shows sort of the multiple feedback loops of what accelerates, the investment in and adoption of the new technology and divestment from and disadoption of the older technologies. And one of the things, several of the forces that are in that diagram are ones that you just alluded to. They are things like public sentiment and support. We turn a blind eye to the downsides and the externalities and the negative side effects and consequences of technologies when there's not a better option available. But man, once a new option becomes available, social sentiment and tolerance can really pivot away quickly. And like you said, we're already seeing some of that with fossil fuels, with combustion engine vehicles. Countries are talking about banning those technologies by a certain date now, and this public support tolerance is diminishing. And we've seen those sorts of patterns in the past. Those are definitely recurring themes in the history of disruption. But it is absolutely, it's a really, really great question. Are we going to? What would that look like? What would that even look like for AI disrupting? I mean, Jesus, everybody's job, basically. I mean, what would public support swinging towards AI? What would that look like? How would public support against human labor writ large? What would that look like? I mean, I guess there is an anti-work movement. I guess there's sort of an anti. I mean, I guess I'm sort of vaguely aware of those things. People who are, who want. What are them, like sort of luxury automated communism and things like that? I mean, I think there are some interesting niche schools of thought that maybe tackle a little bit of this stuff. But so maybe we could ask the question: what would a general decline in tolerance and support for the status quo around human labor look like, and the existing social contract built around it? And then what would a massive public swing towards support and excitement and enthusiasm about artificial intelligence as a threat to human labor, right? Displacing human labor. What would that look like? What, like, can we imagine what a social movement or a general public sentiment might be? That might be a really cool exercise to try to envision that. Yeah. Anyway, there's a really cool idea.
It certainly is going to have something to do with a better system of wealth distribution. I think that seems pretty clear to me. Because otherwise, why would we want, politically speaking, why would we want the AI to be doing our jobs in a sense? So I think a very fundamental shift in economic thought is going to have to occur at the same time.
I mean, we have had some really interesting discussions about what some of these shifts, systemic shifts, might look like, and what forces might be involved, and how to just sort of think about them in general in our other disruption seminars here in MetaUni, and probably we'll continue to have those conversations going forward. And Dan, you'll have to forgive my memory. I'm a little fuzzy between what conversations we've had in those seminars and then what ones you and I have had, just privately between the two of us. I'm a little fuzzy on, so I apologize. Maybe I might be thinking of, we talked about that in the seminar, but actually it was, just between you and me. But we've seen, for example, and we've talked about proposals. Sam Altman had an interesting proposal about, granting claims against land and basically mechanisms for distributing ownership to citizens in not just income like a universal basic income, but actual ownership of or the potential to own assets, a mechanism to purchase claims against those things, because ownership will be very, very important. Obviously, in any world that we don't want massive consolidation of the ownership of capital, and everybody else is just at loose ends and at the mercy of whatever UBI their society manages to implement, kind of thing. So that's one. We've seen interesting proposals from some bright people about that. We also, Jan just sent me something really interesting today about there's a number of folks thinking about inefficiency and bureaucracy. That history of thought goes a long way back. But you may have heard of this term bullshit jobs. And there's some fun thinking about how, there's quite a bit of make work in the modern economy. There's, there are a lot of jobs that are superfluous or even counterproductive, but they are, they're constructions within large bureaucracies, because people need the work, people need the jobs, and so the incentives align such that superfluous jobs and occupations and roles are created within large government and corporate bureaucracies, and those sort of general fall under the rubric of bullshit jobs. There's interesting things to think about there, and
bullshit jobs are how we.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to comment on to link what you just said and what Liam was saying. Bullshit jobs are how we do wealth distribution. I mean, we have two systems of wealth distribution.
Yeah.
Right? We have welfare and we have bullshit jobs. And why wouldn't we expect... It seems to me the clearest way forward is just an explosion of bullshit jobs. Isn't that the easiest way? I mean, it's terrible and depressing, but isn't this the most realistic possibility? Middle classes want more bullshit jobs and less welfare in general, it seems to me. At least that's how we organize our activities. So why wouldn't we expect that as the surplus from AI increases, we'll just see an enormous Cambrian explosion of bullshit jobs?
Well, the question there is can the value that you can possibly the illusion of value that you can attach to a job obviously a bullshit job. Can that exceed the value that the growing value that AI could potentially offer through automation? And so there's a question of whether the bullshit could adapt quickly enough and expand quickly enough to keep up with the technological unemployment driven by the AI.
This is one place where my bets are on humans. This is the place we'll stay ahead of the AIs.
Oh, that's funny. Listen, you guys, I do have to sign off. Thank you so much for having me, Dan. Thank you so much for the invite, and again for creating this amazing world. Really.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
It's awesome. It is absolutely awesome, and it's part of the brighter future that excites me every day. So thanks for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, and this discussion continues every week in the Disruption Seminar. So come along to that and chat on these topics with Adam and I and others.
Awesome.
See you later, Adam.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Adam. Dan, could you say a bit more about what a bullshit job is? What kind of examples? Is it defined by something that provides no real economic value?
Well, that's hard to define. Yeah, it's a tricky concept, and of course you will offend somebody or everybody if you try and define it too precisely. Usually what Adam says is that, this book, is it Graeber? I think is the name of the author. They define it as a bullshit job is something that is self-defined. So if you believe that actually your job doesn't really do anything, then it's a bullshit job. So of course that's subjective. But yeah, it's contentious, right? Maybe the whole idea is actually not very coherent. And it depends on the outcomes you think are what an organization is trying to achieve, right? I think a lot of times when you look closely at what people say about what their organization should be doing, in fact, they kind of see redistributing the income into people within the organization as very far from being bullshit, even if the people receiving the income are not really achieving any external goal defined for the organization. That's up to the people involved, I guess. But okay, yeah, maybe the term is a bit too pejorative. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
Ken is self-identifying as having a bullshit job. Sorry, Ken.
I guess where the reason I say something that doesn't provide any real economic value, where my mind immediately went to was a pretty terse critique of Keynesian economics, which is something like paying someone to dig a hole and then walk on, and then paying someone to follow him and refill the hole in, and somehow that being an economic driver when, of course, there was no actual value created.
Yeah, I think the clearest analysis of it I've seen is something like, there's probably not that many jobs that are 100% bullshit, right? But if you disaggregate the tasks in any given job, there's probably a significant proportion which kind of, that job exists because the manager in that part of the organization had a budget and needed to use it, so they created a role. And probably you don't need a whole human to do it. Actually, it's 20% of a human's full-time attention is required to take form A from database X and turn it into data form Z and submit it to database C. But then that person, once they have that job, needs to defend the existence of that job and prove their utility. So they do a lot of politics. They integrate themselves into various networks. They make themselves useful to people. That's typical human behavior, right? So how much of any given person's job is spent kind of defending that position versus actually kind of delivering value that would be... it's hard to measure, right? Because actually keeping an organization kind of intact is a political problem. A lot of our problems are coordination problems, and a lot of the way we coordinate may look like bullshit. But if you're inside it or actually managing people, maybe you take a little bit more of a softer view on what is bullshit and what is not. I don't manage people, so other people here might comment more on that. But I think it's, it's maybe hard to say, but I think it's pretty clear that some significant percentage of a lot of jobs might not actually, be really delivering value to anybody apart from maybe the person who's deriving a salary. I don't know. That's the argument. But, again, maybe, who's to say what value is? Maybe there's a lot of value in social stability, right? That is a externality. Having the middle classes actually employed and not, pondering revolution in all their time off has some value. So how much?
Yeah.
And there might be actually there might actually be benefit from the critique of bullshit jobs, like from the individual point of view rather than the systemic, because a bullshit job may just be a job where somebody cannot escape how just from the rules set up around them in their work. They can't escape how boring it is, how mundane it is, and how pointless it feels to the person actually doing it.
Yeah, I think that's right. But then...
Dan, in the example you just gave, from the perspective of workflow engineering, lots of companies have that situation where somebody's bringing down data to a form and then moving it over to another database and loading it in. That's just fairly common in business. And that creates those kinds of jobs, but they're necessary. They do add value because they make the process complete. But what it really means is the process isn't fully engineered. And so people wind up filling those gaps where from a technological analysis, it looks like, we could set up an automated program to carry data from one database to another readily, right? That's the common ETL.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
what are your thoughts?
I think the kind of bullshit jobs that Adam is specifically thinking of and which are relevant to, say, progress in AI are largely of that form where we could automate more, but we don't. And just working within a university, it's clear that, or any organization, right, you can look around and clearly see that if people were really motivated, you could automate a lot more. But there's reasons to not do that, which aren't derived directly from trying to achieve the most with the least resources. Are those bullshit jobs? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's at some point when it's absolutely obvious that your job could be automated just by going import X in Python and then 2 lines of code, and now you can just ask GPT to do it and copy and paste. At that point, probably it's clearly a bullshit job. But there's a lot of my friends at Google are just piping protocol buffers into one another, right? And it's not a trivial job sometimes. Maybe it's quite complicated, the data transformation, but it's like, so not a bullshit job 5 years ago, maybe a bullshit job in 1 year. I don't know. I mean, that's why it's self-defined, right? I think it's a bit tricky.
They might also provide a weird sort of second order benefit of at least getting, like from that previous example you just laid out, Dan, of somebody at Google doing a seemingly bullshit job. It might provide stimulation to people moving laterally around in the workplace. So they don't have to put on their resume that they did a bullshit job at Google, but that they just worked at Google. And the more affluent companies tend to have, one would expect them to have more bullshit jobs, but maybe their name and just the sheer value of adding that on your resume could help some fluidity in the job market.
Yeah, and also from the organization's perspective, it's like a cognitive reservist. You have these people sitting around you can deploy to lots of different things, but you got to give them something to do in the meantime that makes them familiar with the systems. And a lot of these things, maybe there's...
I think there's that aspect, but a lot of times what I see in the corporate world is that certain jobs are filled by folks who aren't really technologists. And so they come into a business role, and there's a learning curve to run SQL or even to build an Excel report. And it's quite an accomplishment to get that fulfilled. But once that's been repeated for every week for 3 years in a row, right? It's obviously clear, even to the person still running that process, that this could probably be done better, right? And it just won't be done better because that gap is filled, and only certain select processes in corporations actually get the development team to streamline everything needed to make it work. And then where everything needed didn't actually get put into the model, then people get brought in to fill the gaps. And then after a while, as you just mentioned, people having repeated these tasks for more than a year realize there has to be a better way to do this.
Yeah, I guess we should be a bit careful. There's a sort of values question that's at the center of this, right? Which is, well, if our aim is to achieve productivity, then maybe we call them bullshit jobs because that is getting in the way of productivity. But of course, employment is achieving many other ends which are not just productivity. To call it like social stability might be a bit reductive. It's providing, I mean, maybe you don't like your bullshit job, but it's good to have a job. We see that in plenty of, not only to have a steady income, but it promotes social stability, family formation, all sorts of other things. If we were more productive, maybe we would have less of those things. And especially if we're imagining a transition to a much more automated economy. Yeah, I don't know if like thinking about it as bullshit jobs actually helps because maybe we need to be a bit kinder towards humans if we're to get to a place where I mean it's I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but
I'm reminded of an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, I saw when someone from the past was shocked that there was no money. And what he should do all day. And Captain Picard's answer was enrich yourself, enhance yourself. And
Beautiful.
I wonder, you know, there's the end game. That is the end game, right? As Dan's saying here, you subtract the other reasons why, or the other benefits, the social interaction, you know, various reasons why being in some kind of job is a good thing, independent of exactly what you're doing in the job, are readily transferable to a world where it's no longer about the job. It's just about how to live well. Now, getting there may well be a challenge, but that's the North Star, I think.
I agree. I was actually wondering on the proliferary of this conversation if we might talk about the viability of UBI and UBS, because if we did accept the redundancy of a lot of jobs that have popped up in our, you know, in the modern times, there might need to be something to catch those people if they were, you know, fired. And I was just wondering if anybody had any thoughts on UBI, or if anyone knows about the a later sort of alternative to that, which is universal basic services instead of a universal basic income. And I think I'm really personally fascinated with that idea because it sort of requires that certain crucial industries for human like flourishing or even survival become privatized or even removed from the economy entirely, or maybe sort of subordinated to a different type of economy that's not tied to our trade, just to provide the necessities of housing, clothing, food, maybe even opportunities to education. But yeah, so what do we all think? Do we think that's a viable path forward, or do you think UBI or UBS is a bit defunct?
Yeah, for myself, I don't have a clear opinion about UBI. It seems like an experiment that needs to be done urgently. Some experiments have been done, of course. You're probably familiar with those. I guess some people talk about the recent mailing out of checks in the US during the pandemic as a bit of a negative evidence against UBI and its utility. I think it's confounded by too many other things. I guess I think mostly what I'm worried about is when we talk about a UBI, it's fine to kind of sit at a very high level of analysis and imagine humanity all together, but really we're not like that, right? And in a crisis, it matters very much where you're a citizen. So I'm not sure Australia can afford a UBI. I mean, we're not on track to have very advanced artificial intelligence. So if the future is just radically more productive as a result of AGI, maybe only a few people have it, and the Americans can think about that. But Australians might not have the luxury of such futuristic conceptions. So I don't know if...
I can imagine... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I can imagine it was one of the things that affected the potential, or maybe the actual negative impacts of those checks during the pandemic in the US was due to their huge debt, you know? And I'm thinking again of that Star Trek world where money isn't an issue. And although I've never actually seen that in the show, because I actually haven't watched that much, my dad tells me about it all the time, because he loves the idea and we just pontificate on it for hours. But I think that idea maybe popped up for an interesting reason, because I don't know about you guys, but I feel like a personal dissonance when I learn about how many resources we have and how poorly they're distributed, and it sort of seems as if the economy in the middle there is at fault, you know, because we have, well, at least I don't know many statistics, but I do know that they have enough food in the US to feed everybody, and there's enough real estate to house everybody, and there's certainly enough clothes to shield everybody, and yet there are, you know, thousands and thousands of homeless people across multiple states.
Yeah, for sure. I guess that's evidence that we don't seem to be on track to solve this problem in time. I guess that's why I mean, my flippant comment earlier about bullshit jobs as the savior of humanity is not entirely flippant. It seems a little easier for Google to just scale up hiring half of the American population than it would be for the American government to figure out a UBI. So
At maximum not flippant, and definitely at minimum somewhat honest. Of comment.